All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Keith Vitali, and welcome to Sidekick Podcast. In this episode, I'm really excited to have on a very good friend of mine. He's a legend and an icon of the martial arts. His name is Super Dan Anderson. And let me share with you why he's considered a legend. Um, he is a 10th degree black belt. He owns and operates a school in Gresham, Portland. Not Portland, outside of Portland in Oregon. He's considered a top 10 fighter by all the magazines back in our day. He was nationally rated. He's written 100 books and DVDs. Please welcome my good friend, Super Dan Anderson.
Hey Keith. Hey Mike. How you guys doing?
Well, good. Now, let me
Good,
do
buddy.
this. I'm going to do something a little different. I've never done this before. It's my first time. I'm trying something different in this episode because I'm bringing on a good friend of mine, a friend of ours. His name is Mike
Yeah.
Genova. And he competed with us back in our day. And I thought it'd be great to have him come join our show and share some stories. But let me tell you a little bit about him before I bring him on. Now, I've already done an interview with Mike Genova. And if you haven't seen it, let me tell you just a little bit about him. He's the current president of the South Carolina Karate Hall of Fame. And he also has a martial arts school, just like Dan. It's called Geneva Family Karate in South Carolina. And just like Dan, also, he was a nationally rated fighter by all the magazines during our time. Mike, nice to have you on the show.
Welcome. Two of my favorite people in the whole world, Dan and Keith. Just love being here, guys. Good to see you
Well,
both.
well, this is so good. I'm excited to have you back on. You know, it's a mouthful trying to introduce you two legends because you have achieved so much in your lifetimes. But one of the reasons why I wanted to begin this and create a podcast in the first place was to reintroduce legends like both of you to a whole new generation of martial artists who've never heard of us or heard of martial artists like you. Now, it's not really their fault because the magazines are different today. They no longer cover the tournament circuit like they did before. They don't do articles on martial artists like you guys, and especially they don't put martial arts champions on covers any longer. And it was those covers that created stars. It was those covers that people, had their hard copies in their hands and they looked up to and motivated them and it inspired them. And we no longer have that. Now, let me say there is some good news on the horizon. There's a guy named Rudolph Jackson or Jackson Rudolph. I apologize for switching his name around. A bright young star. He works for Black Belt Magazine, and he is responsible solely by himself for following the tournament circuit, writing articles on them, and he's doing a great job. He's also a nationally rated forms competitor at the same time. He's in pre-med. I don't see how he finds time to do all of that, but he's trying to bring back the tournament genre and the scene like it was back in our heyday, and it was a great time when we had it. Now, you two guys, the reason I have you together is not only are you the historians of the martial arts in our
Yeah.
era, but you guys were the two most charismatic figures ever, fighters we ever had on our circuit. People loved you guys. So I thought it'd be great to have you on the show and let you guys share some stories. And I know people are going to love this. But Dan, I want to start with you. Mike and I have always been jealous of your moniker, Super Dan. We don't have anything in front of our names. How'd you come up by the name Super in the first place?
Well, that was a trick actually that was played on me back in 1972. I'd won the Western States Karate Championships, and the woman who wrote the article, unbeknownst to me, she sent it in, and she was the one who labeled me Super Dan. You see, it was well known in our group that I like comics. Okay. And it was before comics became a big money item type of thing. So I opened the magazine and here it is, the Western States Karate Championships. And she has written in here, and young Super Dan Anderson, as he is becoming rapidly known in the Northwest. And I look at this and I go, what? What? Nobody knows who's Super Dan. What the hell's going on here? So, I complained to her. She says, but nobody knows who's Super Dan. And of course, and uh, her basic response was, deal with it. So anyway, I hated it, absolutely hated it until probably about two tournaments later, somebody actually came up to me and go, oh, Super Dan. And But the sound in his voice it was a respectful nickname. And it was like, oh. And after that, people started calling me Super Dan, and they refer to me as Super Dan in the magazines and that sort of thing. And now here's a historical tidbit. I was the first person ever on the national circuit to have a nickname. This is before Superfoot Wallace. This is before Jeff Smith, the DC Bomber, or Howard Jackson, the California Flash, etc. Super Dan was first in terms of nicknames, and it all started because of a trick that was played on me. So, but I kept it. Yeah, and I kept it, and then when I stopped competing, anybody who would come up and call me Super Dan, and this is a really important story for me. Anybody who called me Super Dan said, that guy doesn't exist anymore. His Dan. And I let it slide for about 20 years. Well, I went to a Grant Cardone 10X seminar, and think of the Super Bowl halftime on steroids. That's what the 4-day event was. And I was down in Las Vegas. And up to this point in time, everybody's talking about branding. It's like Brandon Beliso, you're branding, and Melody Schumann, and you're branding, blah, blah, blah. But nobody could define the term. So what does branding mean? Well, you'll know when you see it, or blah, 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 blah. So I'm listening to this guy, and he's talking about Facebook posts, and you got to watch out. And he's saying, you got to watch out what you post on your personal Facebook post, and because it could affect your brand. And I'm kind of sitting there like, this again. And right after that, immediately, he says, so what is your brand? It's you and what you stand for. And I darn near jumped out of my seats, screaming, thank you, thank you, thank you for the definition. And then about a quarter of a second later, it hits me that I already have a brand that I've been dismissing for 20 years. Super Dan, that was my brand. So I'm sitting there, and I've got my cell phone, and I texted Fred King, who's a very good friend of mine, at the 10X conference. I will tell you why later, but Super Dan is back. Triple exclamation point. Bam, bam, bam. Ever since then, a lot of what I post, a lot of what I write, bam, Super Dan is there, because I already had a brand way before branding became hip. So that's the long story of how I got the nickname. So, and if you ask me any question, you'll usually get the long story.
Well, you were so electric when you competed with us. We all had uniforms on, and you would come into a tournament wearing a T-shirt with Superman. And I didn't hate it. I loved it. I was just so envious. I was going, I wish I could have something like that, but you can't have Super Keith. There's nowhere you can have Super Keith anywhere. So that it just wouldn't work. Now, Mike Genova and I, we played games all the time. We would come up with nicknames, and we could never figure out any. But we didn't care for the nicknames for ourselves. But what we did like to do, and there's no disrespect for people that are masters or grandmasters or great grandmasters or sabanims or whatever they are. But Mike, you and I, we would always joke, going, let's see if we can outdo each other with titles. Give me some of the titles we would come up with.
Well, of course, us being Italian, you would want to be Caesar, and I would be a little bit more jokingly, I would say Big Daddy Long Legs and Emperor, Your Majesty. And, I just think that sometimes in the martial arts, it just gets way out of hand with the titles. And we've always had fun with it, but just in a nice way. I mean, not a disrespect way, just a nice way.
Mike, I'll like to echo you with the idea of the titles, but I think in one way, I think the titles are fine, but the big trick is not taking yourself or your title so doggone seriously that it now
absolutely
becomes this falsely added on part of your persona. I mean, at the end of the day,
right.
We all go to bed. We put on our socks on 1 foot at a time. Well, I can do it 2 feet at a time, but I'm talented. But you look at it like, let's see. I don't remember us wearing glasses back in the day. Okay, we're all over it. We now wear glasses. I had the hair. Oh, we have gray. Keith has got gray. Mike, you got a little bit of gray. We're all, no matter our accomplishments and so forth, we're all people. And the big trick is for me, trying to live up to being as positive as possible. And let me take a left turn in Albuquerque here because I want to mention something here. Last weekend, I just went to the celebration of life of Bob White. Now, Bob White is a very well-known Kempo player, and more so a teacher. But I peripherally knew him. But his last two crises, and he succumbed to cancer. The first time he beat it. The second time it was more aggressive and it got him. But you talk about a life model. Everything he said was positive. And this guy, if anybody had a reason to go, oh, poor me, because this is the second time I've had it, blah, 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 he did. But instead, it was all positive, positive, positive. And I mean, right down to the very last. And here's a guy who got promoted to 10th degree in Ed Parker's Kempo Karate, who had the right to have the title, lord over the title, and that sort of thing. But instead, we have this marvelous human being who's being positive right to the very end. And so, I look at him, and as long as I've been in the martial arts, which is 56 and a half years now, I have role models, and if we get into the chat that I gave you guys at your 10th degree promotions, I'll go over that as well. But that is the type of thing, in my estimation, that we strive for. I've got 4 10th degree certificates. I've got several grandmaster things, and it's super Dan. Just like in the old days, it's super Dan. And we pass on a smile, pass on positivity. Bang! I like that.
Well, that was another reason why I started the podcast. Mike and I talked about it. It was really after all of us being together at the 10th degree promotion, and we were so honored to have you sit on the board with Alan Steen and others. But we noticed so many people passing, away in our generation, of fighters. And I wanted to do this, and so hopefully we can shed some light on them and celebrate their lives. But just think about that celebration that we had at the 10th degree in Dallas, Texas. How many of those people that day have already passed away? Who do we have? We have, was it Burleson is gone now? Skipper Mollison?
Mr. Harrison.
Skipper Mullins.
Yes.
Skipper Mullins.
Skipper Mullins.
Jim
Wow.
Harrison. And it's funny because I remember I was teaching a seminar at that event, and somebody had come up and said, Mr. Harrison just walked in. Do you mind if we take a break and introduce him? And I said, not a problem. I will introduce him. And so I stopped. We all pointed towards Jim Harrison. And I told him, says, well, you're going to meet a lot of seniors here today. But let me tell you that seniors have their seniors. And one of our seniors just walked in. Everybody faced Mr. Harrison, bow. We bowed. And then we continued on. And it was a little longer than that. I wish I'd recorded it. But after that, I went up and personally said hi to him because I was, off to the side teaching so forth. And he had said that was the best introduction he'd ever gotten. And it's, and this is still coming off the title thing, right? Because the respect on a personal level is something that I think should be built up in the martial arts. It's like one of the things that, which was funny is that, we all fought each other like hell. In fact, Keith, you and I had, 4 just blazing matches. In fact, I mentioned last time you and I talked that Robert Harris after St. Pete, came up to me and says, Dan, y'all, what's happening with y'all? You and Keith mad at each other? I says, no, I was going to beat his ass. And he came out there to beat my ass. And you outpointed me, and we had fun. But in the ring, it was all slam bang. But after that, it was like there's the ring generalship and what you're doing in the ring. Then after that, there's the personal, and it's the same thing with like with the titles. It's like, okay, good, you can be a grandmaster, you can be this or that or the next thing, but you're still back being the human being that you were. And as long as you don't let that make your head go, it's
Well,
okay.
speaking about that,
Mm.
speaking about that, we definitely aren't disrespectful because we're all grandmasters. We've all been
Yeah.
promoted. You're even a professor, so we definitely honor all those. It's just that we try to stay humble as well. But I think the promoters of tournaments, though, have taken it to another level. They've all tried to outdo each other, and so while we were receiving, first place championship trophies, other promoters started giving away world championships. And when you start giving away world championships in every division, well, you create thousands and thousands and thousands of world titles, and so now you have people, hundreds of thousands of people walking around going, I'm a world champion. We know some people that are 20, 30 times world champions. And I interviewed a good friend of mine, Don Wilson, who was
The
phenomenal. I mean,
dragon.
he had
The dragon, yeah.
7 world champion full contact matches. He goes, Keith, he says, sometimes it's humbling. I worked my whole life. I'll run into somebody who's got like 30 world champions. So it's watered down the meaning of what world championships mean.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the problem we had with our tournaments during our day. But what I wanted to do right now, if we can, it's almost 2 segments with you. Mike and I are we always talk about you because we love you to death, but you fought in a prior era than we did. So I
Oh,
want to
yeah.
spend a few minutes talking about the great fighters that you fought against. Let me just throw some names. I don't think you ever fought these people, but I believe you might have seen them fight. I know Mike and I didn't, but then Mike saw another generation of fighters fight that I didn't even see because he went to California more than I did. But did you ever get a chance to see Chuck Norris, Mike Stone, Harold, any of the people that we talked about first, Pat Johnson, any of those great fighters fight? Do you ever see them?
Well,
Alan
well,
Steen.
Chuck, Allen, and not Joe, but Mike Stone, they had all retired from competition by the time that I made it to the internationals in 1969. I went down there as a brown belt, and so they were doing kata, and for as much a rough and tumble as fighter as Mike Stone was, he did a magnificent kata. I mean, he was good. He was sharp, but but guys like if you talk about old timers, about let's say Pat Johnson, Louis Delgado, and then you get into Joe Louis. I saw him fight a number of times. John Natividad. I even fought Benny Urquidez. Howard Jackson, and then we slide into just the 72, 73, 74. Watching guys like Jeff Smith and Bill Wallace and those guys. So there are a number of guys that I either fought or watched. Pat Johnson, he wasn't tall, he was short, he was stocky. And so he was a model of efficiency, not a single wasted move. Same thing with Ron Marchini, who was the number one rated fighter in 1969. Ron Marchini, very, very crisp, very direct. Louis Delgado, I only got to see West Coast Louis Delgado. Now, East Coast Louis Delgado was round kick, spin kick, very freewheeling. Then he comes to the West Coast, gets a little bit more direct. So he's a little bit more facing forward, a little bit more reverse punch. Very, very classic front kick. I mean, just marvelous body mechanics. And but you get those guys, and then you get let's say Howard Jackson. Now Howard Jackson, I fought him twice, and this and I will maintain this to my dying day when I'm pushing up roses out in my backyard out in the country. When you talk about blitz and you talk about, let's say the two during our era, Eddie Newman and Nasty Anderson were known for their quick takeoff blitz, right? Compared to Howard Jackson, waist deep in mud.
Wow.
Howard was that quick. Now, you remember how quick I was. The guy could run on the inside of my kick. I remember Jeff Smith was telling me, he says, Dan, hit him with a side kick. He's right when he moves, hit him with a side kick. Okay. I get there. I'm setting him up. Man, I'm setting him up, and I see him start to move. That side kick cocks. Boom! I'm punched. He was that quick off the line. So yeah, he was magnificent. Pardon?
Who was the best you consider during that era that, like we had Jeff Smith and Joe Louis and Howard Jackson. We had, Benny Kids, Bong Yu, had all these great fighters there. Who do you consider the best of that era?
It would have to boil down to three people at the same time. Howard Jackson, brilliant blitz. Jeff Smith, the smartest and the most confident fighter I've ever seen. I've seen Jeff walk into an arena and all of a sudden just own the space. I mean, own the space all the way to the upper and lower corners. He was not as quick as Howard, not as quick as Bill, and who was my third pick at that time. And then Bill Wallace. Everybody talks about his flex and his kicking and so forth, but his balance and his accuracy. Because I've seen people come in, because Bill popped that one leg. I've seen him play bumper bodies when they come in, bang, bang his body, and you'd see him go ding, 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 ding on one leg and hit you with that kick. Amazingly accurate. So on any given day, because when I look at the tournament karate, when I was involved, you had the number one, then you had the top tier, then you had the second tier, and you had the third tier. Okay, the number one guy was the number one guy. So whether it was Chuck in his day or Joe in his day or you in your day or whatever, the number one guy was the number one guy. Then there was the top tier. Okay, we were the guys you had to beat. And if you didn't beat us, which you didn't always beat us, but if you didn't beat us, okay, we were number one for that day. And so forth. During that 73, 74 period of time, it was either Jeff, Bill, or Howard. There was no number one. In my memoirs, I nicknamed them the triumvirate. And it's the only time in point karate that I've seen where you had three people that were all number one, so to speak. And they were all incredible. They were just like, and the fascinating thing, now here's the fascinating thing, is that they were all incredibly giving. I remember Howard Jackson. They misquoted in a magazine where I beat him 2-1. And he beat me 2-1 that day. But I happened to mention, keep your eye on Howard Jackson because, man, this guy's gonna do something. Every time I ran into him, he always pointed out and was very, very thankful to the fact that I had mentioned him. And, this guy. And then we all know Bill. Bill is just about as genuine as anything. If anybody has earned a chip on his shoulder, as Bill Wallace. No chip on his shoulder, and then.
Why do you say that? Why do you say chip on the shoulder? Why would he have one? He's the greatest of all time. Why would he have one?
He earned it. He could act like the biggest snot ball. He could do a W.C. Fields thing. You go up, gosh, Mr. Wallace, could I have an autograph? Blah blah blah. And let me give you, and he could do this because he's earned. I mean, he's earned all these titles. He's earned all this fame. Blah, blah, blah. So he could act like. Sorry, here. Don't edit this out because I've been quoted on this before. But he could have acted like Joe Louis. I remember Joe Louis blowing me off when that year in the 1969 internationals. It's like, and he's warming up, and I met all these guys. I met Bruce Lee that day. I met Steve Saunders. I already knew Chuck Norris, etc. And I walk up and he just, I'm warming up. Like W.C. Fields, get away from me, boy! You bother me. And Bill could have done that because he was so doggone well known. But that wasn't Bill. In the 73 U.S. championships, and I just come off of like a second place win at the internationals, and wow, there's Bill Wallace. First time I get to meet Bill Wallace. This is really cool. So I walk up and he's doing nothing, and I say, "Excuse me, Mr. Wallace. Hi, I'm Dan Anderson. You don't know me. I'm from the Pacific Northwest. Could I ask a favor of you?" He says, "What would you like?" He goes, "Could you help me with my hook kick? Could you give me a pointer or two on my hook kick?" He took me outside into the hallway where we stretched and we trained for 20 minutes. This is the number one guy in the country paying attention. Some nobody kid from nowhere. That's Bill. So he could have been, the magnificent champion. Kid, wait until you've done something, then you can talk to me. He could have had that chip on his shoulder. He earned it, but he didn't.
Right. No, he
no,
was
not at all. He's
a giving person.
Absolutely. And most of the guys of that era were terrific role models that way. Jeff Smith in a hotel room taught me how to do his version of the sidekick, which I then adapted to make my sidekick. I mean, these guys made a tremendous impact on me. They were wonderful.
Let me tell you something. I just read, Mike. I never shared this with you because I just read this, and it was something about Bill Wallace that made me respect him even more. In my book, he's the best point fighter of all time, and you got Raymond Daniels maybe 2, and Raymond McCallum maybe 3. But those are my 3 favorites. But I read something where they were quoting Bill Wallace. He says, "Yeah, I usually win 4 or 5 to nothing." He goes, "What I get upset about, I'm a perfectionist. I'll miss 1 or 2 kicks, and it upsets me that I missed with those 1 or 2 kicks." Usually we competed, as long as we won, we didn't care. I mean, but he was upset
right.
that the kicks he threw didn't land because he thought he should land every kick. He was that, that perfection type of a perfectionist fighter. So that's probably why he's probably considered by all as the best point fighter of all time. And Mike and I, we've been so fortunate. I've trained with Benny Urquidez. Just think of all the different people: Joe Louis, Bill Wallace's, all those great fighters from the back, Billy Blanks, and Ron Mancini. I got a chance to spend some time with him. I really liked him. What do you think about Mike Warren compared to your top 3 fighters? How would he do against those 3, or did he ever fight those 3?
I refuse to comment on anything that I might be inaccurate about. I never met Michael Warren.
I got you.
Jeff Smith thought the world of him. Jeff would tell me he's Bill Wallace with both legs.
That's what Joe Corley said too.
And I missed out. Let's see, they had the 60th anniversary of Ki Wang Kim's get together this last May, and I was Facebooking Gerald Robbins, who was one of Ki Wang Kim's guys, and all these guys were going to be there. Joe Hayes, Mitch Bobrow, Michael Warren, Gerald Robbins, all these guys, East Coast guys I'd read about in the magazines, but never met. And I said, "Oh man, so what get together would be great to come out and meet these?" I figure, okay, there's a whole slew of East Coast guys that I never got to meet. I did get to meet Tom LaPuppet, very gracious gentleman. But the thing was, and then of course, it's in 2 weeks. It's like, yeah, right. I got to plan for these things, man. I work for a living. I can't drop the money and just fly off. But Mike Warren, one of these days, I hope somebody's got some old video films of him and Joe Hayes and Mitch Bobrow, because I would love to watch these guys. But only by reputation can I say anything about Mike Warren.
No, we got a chance to watch Mike Warren even fight in our era, and Bobby Tucker fought him. But Bobby Tucker, it was at the end of Mike Warren's career, so Bobby Tucker handled him pretty easily. But Joe Corley, a personal friend of mine, and he would always just brag on how great Mike Warren. The first time I get a chance to see Mike Warren fight, he fights Bobby Tucker. Bobby Tucker just hands it to him. But Mike, you went to California. You got a chance to see these guys now. It doesn't have to be statistically the best fighter, but in your mind, who do you think were the best fighters from that era that you got a chance to see?
It was me.
No, I'm talking about before us. I'm talking about the era before us.
There was no era before us. We started everything.
Howard Jackson speed. I think Howard Jackson closing the gap was the fastest of any fighter I saw. And actually, when I look back at Howard Jackson, I have a film of him beating Bill Wallace 2 times in the Battle of Atlanta. In 1973 and 1974, he beat both Bill Wallace and Jeff Smith back to back. He beat Jeff Smith both years for grand champion. And he actually did it by closing the gap on both of them, and he didn't fake a lot. His fakes were, like your types of fake, Keith, where you make them jump. He faked, and then he would come in. But Bill could not get his kick up in time. I mean, And Bill being a very personal friend of mine, me knowing Howard before he died, it was hurtful to see how quickly Howard Jackson closed that gap on Bill. I mean, it was unbelievable. Bill just couldn't handle the speed. And Bill had just beaten Andy Seltzer right before that fight, Keith, who was a good friend of ours. And Jeff Smith beat Eddie from Michigan. I watched that fight. And before that, he beat Fred Wren. So Jeff Smith had some tough fights too. But I'm just telling you, Howard Jackson was a league of his own. The 2 years that I saw him fight the Val of Atlanta, I mean, he went through everybody with no trouble. And that was 73 and 74.
That warms my heart because Howard was such not only a terrific fighter, he was such a wonderful fellow. And I'm just sitting here smiling, remembering Howard. Yeah.
Well, we went, Mike and I spent some time with Howard Jackson. We went to Steve Fisher's tournament. And Mike Stone was there, and Howard Jackson had just finished competing overseas against a Japanese kickboxer and destroyed his legs. And he lost that fight because he wasn't used to being kicked in the legs. And as we were walking and talking about old times, he had a hard time even walking. He was in so much pain.
He had a cane.
He was in so much pain.
Yeah.
I never got a chance to actually see them, but we had some local Columbia fighters with Mike Genova, our good friends, Howard Vanderbeek, and that whole crew. They flew down to California. They trained with Howard Johnson or Jackson, and also Pat Johnson. And they trained, and then they flew back, and they were so excited because at this time we were standstill fighters. We hadn't been introduced yet to the dash punch. And so it started on the West Coast with these guys. So I remember Howard Vanderbeek's good friend of Mike Genova's and I, he calls me up at 3:00 in the morning. He just got back. He was so excited. He couldn't wait till the next day. And he calls me up and he says, Vitali, I'm going to kick your ass. And I went, hey, who's this? He goes, it's Howie. I said, I thought you were in LA. He says, no, I just learned these super techniques. You're not going to believe them. He said, I can't wait to kill you with these techniques. We're great friends. So he's just being facetious. I said, so, all right, let's work out tomorrow. He goes, tomorrow? No, let's do it now. I said, it's 3:00 in the morning. He said, I don't care. So at 3:00 in the morning, he comes over to our apartment. We get dressed out and we spar. But, he didn't have it at the time. And he was I'm just laughing. It's one of my best memories. I was giggling every time he tried the dash punch on me, but he hadn't perfected it yet. And I kept on sticking him with my sidekick because I just didn't stand with my sidekick. I would move back before I'd throw it. So I kind of get out of range. But I just remember then, but there was a whole new revolution that came to the East Coast. And man, it took us by storm. You better not be standing still. And Mike, don't you think that's the difference of their era? Because I want to move into our era now. Is their difference was they were phenomenal fighters, best of all time, but yet they were still stand-still fighters. And then the new era transitioned and then the movement. What do you think about that era?
Well, if you look at those old footage films, which I did all during COVID, they went straight up and straight back. And Dan, you were part of that, where they went straight up and straight back. And actually the referee probably didn't move that very much during the ring. And then the corner judges could see it. But in our era, the referee was moving like he was on a bicycle, getting out of the way because we were circling the ring in and out, changing directions. And the movement, that's the biggest thing is the movement. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think the technique in that era that Dan was talking about was actually better as far as technique of the side kick and the body punch and the round kicks and the back spinning side kicks. When I look at, Norris and Joe Louis throwing those kicks, the form was perfect. Where ours, we did it on the run. We did it in, backing up, moving in, an angler kick. So, we may not have been as crisp like a John Chung kick, but, we were sticking them as we were moving them. But yeah, the movement is the difference, the biggest. And fakes. They didn't fake back then. When Fred Wren was coming in, he was coming in. As soon as he was coming in. But, we start in and start out, So yeah, the fakes and the movement were the biggest differences of what we did.
If you could have fought, still, this is a question going back to the old timers, not the new ones. Mm-hmm. Who would you have loved to have fought if you had one wish? You could go back in time and you're in a tournament and they call your name and then somebody steps up and you say, that's the person I wish I could have fought. Doesn't mean you're going to win or not, but you just wish you could have had that on your resume.
Wait, you're talking about me first?
Dan,
all right. Would I pick somebody that I think that my sidekick would benefit me and I could beat him, it'll be fair and win because he was too far away when he started. I knew he was coming. I can watch the films and tell you right before he gets ready to move. Who would I not like to fight? Probably Mike Warren. That flexibility he had was just overwhelming. It was like Wallace again. You don't know where that kick's going to land. I mean, once his knee is up, and you just can't get out of the way. And I told Keith, I think I told you this recently. I think Jeff Smith is one of the 3 best fighters of all time. He's right leg, left leg, going forward, going backwards, use both hands, either side. I mean, technician wise, and I agree, he doesn't have the explosive speed, but he's throwing so much at you. It is a blitzkrieg, and he knows what he's doing.
Oh, he's great.
He knows what he's doing. I talked to Robert Harris, over COVID. I called a bunch of fighters. Robert Harris just was like Mabby Tucker. He would just go out there and just fight. He had no strategy whatsoever. He was just that good, but he won that much. Jeff Smith had strategy before he got in the ring. He knew what he was doing, and he could change what he was doing in the ring. If something wasn't working, he wasn't stuck on that game plan. I think Jeff Smith is even though he was number 1 2 times, I think Jeff Smith, had he not got into full contact, could have dominated the light heavyweight division for many years and during our era. I think he could have. I think he would have beat the Larry Kellys and the John Longstreets. He hit hard too. He was a really, he was a good banger.
He was an old Texan. I don't know if you know that, but he was a Texan. So, in Texas, even the weenies are tough. And that's a quote by Steve Fisher. Now, to answer your question, Keith, when I look at it, what I would like, if wishes were fishes, okay, 1979 Dan Anderson, which I think was probably my peak year. That's my peak year. That's not my phone. I would have liked to fight any of these guys. I would have liked to fight Joe Louis. Joe Louis was good, but his latter point fighting days was more intimidation than angular movement, technical skill. He was a genius who didn't do what he knew. Jeff would have been an amazing tactical match if I could have, if I could have withstood the onslaught, if I could have withstood the beating, any of those guys. I don't have a particular person that I would have liked to play. I think 1979 Super Dan would have hung with any of those guys. I would have given them a run for the money. And of course, thinking like, and this is something I bring up privately to others. I don't go public on this very much, but correct me if I'm wrong. Thinking like a champion. Okay. Thinking like a champion. I'd be out there to spank every one of them, whether I could or not. I'd be out there. It's like, Mikey, if you and I ever fight, you're toast. And I would see and I would bet I'd see the thought balloon right over your head. Says, Super Dan, you're running right into that kick, and that sort of thing. Because that's how champions think. And
I know you've got something you want to say, but I got to segue. He just segued me into this. Are you ready, Dan? I'm going to give you the best compliment you're ever going to receive in your whole martial arts.
Does it involve
career.
Money?
Are you ready?
Are you going to send me money?
So Dan and I were talking, and it was around 1980, the 80s, and we were talking about what I could do to be better. And you told me that I needed to develop a reverse punch. You said, Mike, you've got your hook kick, you got your side kick, you got a back fist, ridge hand sometimes. So what we've done, and we still do today in my school, in one of our sparring sessions, is let's say that you and Keith are sparring, and you're 2 of my students. I said, okay, now, once you score a reverse punch, Dan, you can't even throw another one. Keith, once you've scored your back fist on Dan, you can't even throw another one. And we're going to go to 5. So what we have, Dan, is we have, and I'll take me, for instance, let's say I'm fighting a fighter, and I'm a 4-0, but I have nothing else. He would beat me 5-4. So because of what you told me, I get my fighters to develop that 3rd, 4th, and 5th technique. And because of that, it made me a better fighter at the end of my career because I was able to develop a little bit more. But had I done that early in my career, I think I could have been actually on the level with you and Keith because I won a few championships, but you guys won grand championships, Mid-Americas, Battle of Atlanta, Dallas, Texas. I mean, Dan, I think you won over 100 grand championships out in the Northwest. I mean, so I think that that's what it takes to have that extra third, fourth, and fifth technique that you can rely on against good fighters, not against mediocre fighters, but against the good fighters.
Yeah.
And that's my thank you to
you.
you
Now,
for that.
here's I'm going to place. I'm going to see if Keith remembers this very well because this exemplifies what you're talking about. You know, like having ace in the hole moves, or like Ray McCallum. You know, he had Twilight Zone moves. It's like he'd do crazy stuff that you never expect, but they were ace in the hole moves. So Keith and I are slugging it out in San Jose. And I think this is the last time that Keith and I fought. And one of the things that I always watched were what was the guy's go-to technique. Now, here's the interesting thing. Keith had the kicks, et cetera, but when the chips were down, left-handed back fist. We are in overtime, and his ass is mine. I'm setting him up. I'm watching him, man. I'm left side forward. And right when he flinches, okay, I know the backhand is coming. Here comes that high block, and here comes the underpunch. What does he do? He extends forward with his right hand and hits me. I'm right like this, and he's over here hitting me in the ribs. Where's the damn back fist? And he clipped me in overtime. He suckered me, and this exemplifies what you're talking about having more than one backup type of thing, you know. And I don't know if he counter chess moved me, knowing that I was going to watch out for that backhander. I never asked him, but it was one of like
true that
angle punch out of the blue. I don't know what you're doing throwing an angle punch at a guy like me, but dadgummit, it sure worked, didn't it? But anyway,
let me tell you this.
So Keith,
I was going to say this real quickly. You two were the smartest fighters on the circuit. Now, Mike Goldman, we have a student between us, was a top fighter as well. He said, Keith, I always got my techniques from you and my strategy from Mike Genova. I always thought I was a pretty smart fighter, but I gave you two credit as the smartest. You were technically smart. You had a game plan when you went in. Bobby Tucker, Robert Harris, Larry Kelly, Ray McCallum, there's no such thing as a game plan.
Larry had a game plan, but it was limited. Larry had a game plan, but it was limited.
Right.
I'm going to kick it.
Here's the thing you would do to me, and I loved it, but you would come to me right before, during the tournament, we're hanging around, and you go, Vitali, when you get left side forward, here's what you're going to throw. When you get right side forward, here's what you're going to throw. I know what you're going to do already. And I just look at you going, and I'm thinking, how in the world did he figure this out? But you knew it. You were technical. Mike Genova was the same way. He'd go, Keith, look at that guy. I can tell you what he's going to do it, when he's going to do it. I think Jeff Smith and Chuck Norris were two of those same kind of fighters. I have so much respect for Chuck Norris. I thought he was just a general in the ring. And Jeff Smith, too. If you know Jeff Smith now, he's one of the smartest businessmen in all the martial arts. He's brilliant. I listen to him all the time. I don't have a martial arts school, but I love listening to him because he's so brilliant. But you two, when you got in a battle with you, and I had to fight both of you guys all the time, I knew there was strategy there. You had to be a technician.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, I don't even remember throwing the reverse punch because I kept on thinking maybe it was the back fist or whatever. But you're right.
I was waiting for the back fist. I still want the back fist because this hand remains unsatisfied. It wants your ribs.
But you got
43 years down the road, it wants your ribs. I want the back fist, damn it.
Yeah, but you came back at the Mid-Americas, and I really won them because I won the ring the year before, and I really thought I was going to win it again, and you surprised me and went on to win the ring that, and I was like, I was happy for you. You were my friend, but you surprised me.
Let me tell you what my strategy going in, and I don't think I've ever mentioned this to anybody before, but my thoughts going in, because see, I remembered you and I warming up at the internationals, running into that stupid sidekick of yours and, and so forth. Right. And this is the first time we fought. So my thought was, okay, whatever he does, I'm going to do. So if you'd fake, I'd fake. You back up, I back up. You throw a move, I throw a move. And and it went into overtime. I think every one of our matches went into overtime. I don't remember.
Yeah, they were close.
I mean, they were very, very tight matches. But I had a tactic at the time where if a person was coming at me, I would back up in parallel speed, and then at some point jump up in the air, and the other person would close, and boom, I'd hit him with that front punch. And that's what I got the scoring technique on, because most of us, once we got into overtime, it was like, hey man, all bets are off. We better close this quick, because the other guy, what might happen is the other guy gets lucky, they hit him, damn, they've got the victory, right? So I knew you were coming. Back up, jump up, boom, hit with the punch. But the thing was, the overall strategy was, no matter what you did, I was going to mirror it. And so you never caught me coming in charging you, because you weren't charging me at the time. And there's that one picture in I think it was the Mid-America magazine or Karate Illustrated, where you and I are locked. I mean, we're clashing. So obviously at that point, you came forward, I came forward, and we were battling it out. But yeah, it's funny because, and I'm sure Mike will echo this, is that people tended to fight in patterns, and one of the things that I tell my students these days is that if you are, and Mike was even better at this than I was, which not many people were better at this than I was, but if you're patient, if you wait for 30 seconds, your opponent will show you everything that they're good at. Because one, they will never attack you from a position of lack of confidence. So let's say if they're confident in right horse stance instead of left forward stance, they'll come at you in a right horse stance. They will also throw their money shot at you. They might fake once or twice, but either here comes this side kick, here comes this back knuckle, here comes the reverse punch. You wait anywhere 15 to 30 seconds. You kiss off that amount of time, and they will let you know. It's almost a singing telegram. Here comes the sidekick, and then from there, you could base your strategy around them, because they've already they've already laid their face cards up, and
yeah,
and very, very seldom did anybody ever change what they're doing. You knew what Larry Kelly was doing. I mean, even before you read the magazines, his right leg was out there and he was going ding a ding a ding a ding a ding with gato. You always knew what he was doing. Okay, here comes that round kick. Here comes that ridge hand. Boom! Bobby Tucker. Okay, he comes out there. First thing right off the bat is that amazingly quick side kick. It's like, you might as well write it down on a piece of paper. Let me study it for a half hour, and then then I'll put you on my Christmas card list or something, because you just let me know everything you're going to do, and you let me know what you're good at, and then. I was a generalist, and I mentioned this last time you and I talked, Keith, which was, there were two types of fighters. There was the Joe Louis, Bruce Lee kind of guy, which was, okay, strong side forward, whatever your dominant side, you really developed the hell out of that. Then there was the Chuck Norris type of fighter who developed both sides, right hand, right leg, left leg. And although it took longer, it was smarter for me, for my frame of mind, to develop the Chuck Norris setup. And you've even mentioned this, like when we met at the International, said, God, you look like me, you move like me, but you do it with your left side too, and that took a long time, but it helped keep me, relatively speaking, unpredictable. My whole thing was, you shut down my right leg, here comes my right hand. You shut down my right leg, my right hand, and here comes my left hand. Okay, Mid-American Nationals, 79. I had to fight David Deaton to go into the finals. Left hand reverse punch in overtime. I'm a natural righty, but right leg foot sweep, left hand punch. Had I not had the left hand punch, David would have been fighting you that night. And I got all sorts of different tales as to which leg, which arm, et cetera, just because I developed both sides. And this is one thing that you know, a lot of people, even in our era, still didn't develop. You know, working both sides, 2 hands, 2 legs. But if we get into a rant on current day tournaments, how they score, how they run, and so forth, back then, the rules were broad enough that we could each play to our stylistic differences. You know, you couldn't get a whole lot different fighter between, let's say, Mike, you, or Keith, and let's say Steve Fisher. Okay, 2 totally different styles of fighting, but top 10 players, because you could use those strengths to your advantages because the rules were broad enough. And, you know, you didn't have the things that, you know, like, what is it? Is it 2 points or 3-point kick to the head? What is it these days? I know it's more than 1, but
I don't even know. It changes.
You know, it's one of those where, you know, back in the day, expanded targets. Okay. 1 point for everything. You know, you get, it's like, you know, Keith was talking about, you know, Ray Daniels, who I've never seen fight as a point fighter. I've seen him in his full contact matches. I've seen him in that padded octagon thing where they're doing karate matches and so forth. But, you know, what would me, Fish, or Mad Dog have done if he bounced on us with, you know, the pogo stick leg thing, come and kick him? Cup check right away, or leg sweep. You know, modern day rules don't count for that. And I watch, I'll get a feed on Instagram, and, you know, and what you'll see is the, you know, the guys doing the bouncing Betty thing, ding, 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 shooting the kick. And I'm thinking, go for the twins. Come on, guys, just somebody go for the twins. Hit them underneath. or do a Raymond, drop down, sweep the guy, let out a war whoop, jump on him and beat on him. But different time is like, it's funny because I used to crab about this, but actually, Mike, when we were at the Battle of Atlanta, you said something that just, I mean, it indicated so perfectly, which is the game that's being played today is not the game that we left. And it's kind of like,
right.
Okay, that puts it in perfect perspective, because the game we played, different set of rules, different set of tactics, different set of degree of heavy hitting, et cetera, and the game that's played now, okay, well, yeah, I hate to say it, but it's like, what, for me, it's like 40 years down the road. Okay, the game's changed in 40 years, and I'm happy to have played the game.
But Dan,
yes, sir.
Exactly. And instead, it's like having a child grow up and they're gone. Our child was the 70s and 80s of point karate. We had it at a perfect time. I think our time was better than the first era because of our camaraderie ship and because we could travel all over the country and fight. There was a tournament every weekend. Every weekend we had access to go to a tournament and fight, which was an incredible and a good tournament and fight good fighters. So we were really able to hone our skills. And Dan, I'm going to give you your second and last compliment while I have you nationally. Keith and I had a whole stable of great fighters, not only in our school, but our area, which we shared, from Jay Bell to Robert Harris to James White to Bobby Tucker. I mean, we all trained together. Michael Goldman, John Orr, Bruce Brucci, we all trained together. You didn't have anybody up there. You and Larry Kelly, Larry Beal, where he was from, you didn't have that. Those guys down in Texas, Al Francis, Jimmy Tavares, McCallum, they could all, fight each other every weekend. You didn't have that. And for you to excel coming out of that no man's land is really amazing. It really, truly is. So, I've always, been complimentary to your success, because the California guys, you drive 5 miles and you go into a school and there's 20 black belts that are tournament fighters to fight. You didn't have that. And for you to get as good as you were to win those championships, I mean, hats off to you. And, all the respect in the world for that.
I do have to mention one thing, and that is, I did have guys that kept me honest. Every you guys all know Fred King, and Fred in the dojo had to be the sneakiest son of a gun you ever met. And Twilight Zone moves, and he'd go to tournaments and he'd basically reverse punch or back knuckle. I mean, he'd really go conservative on what he could do. Inside the dojo, he was hell. I mean, and he was a slippery dog. And he had a couple of students that were very talented. And it's I'm gonna there's a book, one of my most favorite martial arts books. It's called Sugar Ray, and it's the autobiography of Sugar Ray Robinson, boxing, right? And one of the interesting things is that, they weren't national caliber, but Sugar Ray was often upgraded for taking on easy 10-rounders. Because he fought over 200 times. He won 190 fights. I mean, you talk about Mayweather and he wins 50 fights. Kind of like, yeah. Go win 100 fights and let's talk. But one of the things that he had said, and this is one of the reasons why I competed in small tournaments, and if I didn't have, let's say, the highest caliber top 10 guys like you guys had, his phrase was, you need the easy ones to keep you sharp. And so instead of going into wars all the time with the guys, I could work on tactics. I could work on strategy. I had this guy, he was a kata guy, and he was a left legger. I remember his name was George Kikes. Rubber hips. And when we'd work out together once a week, so what would I do? I would go left leg on left leg with him. And his left leg was better than mine. But I would do it just because this guy wasn't a threat. And then every once in a while, I'd get tired of getting hit. I'd switch to the right leg. I'd spank him a little bit. And then I'd go back to the left leg. But I had situations like that. And, it goes back to the positive thing. And I'm going to slide over to Keith here just for a moment. And that is, in my estimation, okay, my way of thinking, okay, we had, between you, me, Raymond, and Gato, and Larry, and Keith, we all had relatively comparable skills and approaches. But why was Keith number one? Was he quicker than me? No. Was he rougher than Raymond? No. Could he kick with the same accuracy that Larry? No. What did he have? He wanted it just a little bit more. The desire was there. And when I was coming up, that desire was there. So whenever I'd work with people, okay, God, I need to work on my left leg. So instead of my left leg sucked, here's this guy who I can play with my left leg. And the left leg sucks. All right, good. Let's see if I can get it to unsuck. My left hand stinks. I got knocked out working on my left hand. Only working on my left hand. Moved in, pow! Walked right into a jumping counter punch. But I wanted that left hand. Want that left leg and so forth. We get into the matches, and when you talk about desire, it's a good thing for all of us that Steve Fisher was not 6 foot tall, because he would have ruled the cosmos. Right. Because his intent, his desire was that much higher. The only thing was he was shorter, he was slower, quick little bunnies like us, we could tag him. But when we take a look at and I think this is the thing that put Keith over the top. He wanted it more. Why is he going to do this stupid angle punch in overtime, which could cost him the match and the championship? Because he wanted the point and was willing to take the chance.
You agree with that, Keith?
I call it, Benny Peters calls it heart. I know I had a lot of heart and desire, and and being number one, I wanted it even more to prove that it wasn't a fluke this first year and so forth. But no, you're right, and I thank you for that. It was good. I think on any given Sunday, any of us could have won, and any of us did win. You guys were so fortunate to have articles written about you. You guys were fortunate to be on the covers of magazines, and I'm going to drop these down during the interview. And because of that, you guys became legends and icons in the martial arts. Get this, not only here, but all over the world. Because at that time, American karate was the leader in tournament karate at the time. Mike Genova tell you a story. We went to Italy together. We went into a pizza just to grab a pizza. Mike, tell them what happened when we went in that time.
Well, we were, Keith was on the set doing the movie with Jackie Chan, Meals on Wheels, and we were in Barcelona, Spain, and then we rented a car, Keith and I, with Benny, your kitties, and we drove through the south of France into Italy, and we got there late at night. Everything was closed, and when they found out that we were doing a movie and we were Americans, they opened the restaurant, and they were serving us food, and they came in, and they had magazines with Keith on the cover, articles of me, and they made this big banquet of Italian food, and we signed their magazines. These are, it's a little village called Ventimiglia, Italy, in very northern Italy, right past the border of France. And they knew who we were. And they knew Benny the Jet as well. And we signed their magazines. It was, what a great compliment to us.
I had something like that happen myself. There's a practitioner in the United Kingdom. His name is Ian Abernethy. And he is very, very well known in the UK and in Europe for how to apply kata to self-defense, right? And there's a buddy of mine, Corey Minitani. He goes, "Hey, this guy's got this book out. It's a free ebook." And I'm thinking, free's a good price. And he says, "Yeah." So I get it. I download it. And in there, this particular move, he has a particular application. That was the same application that I put in my Arnis empty handbook. And I thought, damn, okay. So I write him, "Hi, Ian, here's this page. Isn't this amazing? This is just kind of funny that we don't know each other. We haven't met each other. And boom, we've got the same arm lock that comes off of this move." First words in an email out of his mouth, "Hi, Dan, thank you very much. Are you the same Dan Anderson who used to compete in the late 70s and 80s? Yeah. And I write him back, "Yeah." And I'm thinking, "You've heard of me in the UK?" Yeah, they'd heard of me in the UK. And so the American karate scene and Black Belt Magazine, Karate Illustrated, it was known around the world. And it's funny because Keith, you're bringing up the kid who's trying to resurrect the scene. With the advent of the internet and the lessening impact of actually hard copy magazines, there's a type of not only popularity, but there's a type of inspiration to the youngins that they don't have that we had. When Mike, when Keith and I were talking earlier, one of the things I'd mentioned was that when I was a white belt, Black Belt Magazine was bi-monthly. Came out once every 2 months. I would walk over a mile to the store to pick up my copy, and in there they had the technique of the month, and you'd have crazy things like Chuck Norris does a fake backhand chop and does a spinning back kick. Ooh.
And you'd work on it.
I went to my school. I showed it to my instructor. "Now, is this how it's done?" And I could tell from the look in his eyes, he had never seen it before. And he just a little bit of lag. There's, "Yeah, something like that." And but with the magazines, with the hard copy magazines, so that was the way the information got out at that time. You had the possibility of learning things, but you also had sports heroes. Because like I mentioned, Keith was track and field. I was baseball, but I was a failed baseball player. And so as a kid, looking for something to get into, bam, I get into martial arts. First lesson, it's like diving off the high board and not even hitting the water yet. I mean, just still flying through the air. And Then there's the magazines. Chuck Norris, who's this Norris guy? Joe Louis, who's this Louis guy? Alan Steen. Alan Steen beat both this Norris guy and this Louis guy. Wow. And you had this. These days with 9-year-old world, multi-world champions, no print medium, nothing that you could actually sit and hold in your hands and go, wow. Instead you've got YouTube that, you watch 30 seconds and pow, you're onto something else. You're onto the latest episode of Doctor Who. That's me, or whatever. They don't have the same thing that we had that gave us inspiration, that caused the technical evolution to jump every week. If you learned the low high round kick and you're whipping everybody the first week of February, by the second week of February, somebody had figured out a counter. By the third week of February, we figured out the counter to the counter, and that was the growth of the American point karate scene.
Yeah, the newness was there for us. It's not there anymore. There is no newness. No, there's nothing new. But we were all learning stuff in the beginning. Chuck and those guys did very limited techniques, and then by the time we got involved, we really, really took it to the next level. And that's what we all learned from each other. We brought Wallace to Columbia. We learned from him. We brought Lewis to Columbia. Of course, Keith went down to Atlanta and was training with Joe Corley and all of those fighters from the Atlanta stable, and then sharing those ideas back with us. He didn't keep that for himself. And then, so we were all getting better. And Dan, I want to say this, when I was reading the magazines before I was actually into martial arts, because I was living with Bruce Ritchie at the time, and he was doing the stuff. I was reading Black Belt magazine, and you were in it with Steve Fisher, and there was article, your names and your pictures and stuff. And then I saw you fight in internationals in '72, and I watched you fight Byung Yu, and then I saw Byung Yu fight Joe Louis, and Joe Louis beat him, and then Joe Louis lost to Darnell Garcia for grand champion. And I watched all those fights from ringside. I was a white belt. I sat, crisscross spaghetti sauce right at the ringside and watched those fights. So, to think that one day that we'd be friends here in 2023 is amazing. But I remember you had the long hair; it was down to your shoulders, and I had my fro at the time. And
Keith's hair looks just the same, just darker.
Exactly. And at the time, I had not started working out with Keith yet. It was before I actually started working out with Keith. And Keith was a brown belt when I started, so he was ahead of me. But I watched you fight, and I watched all these great fighters, Red Kelly, and all these incredible fighters. And I just go from ring to ring, and just was so inspired, and couldn't wait to get back and learn new stuff like what you're saying. So Dan, Keith opened this whole segment, very smartly. So Keith, almost like a movie. The beginning is what the era that you saw that we didn't get to see. We may have seen it, on YouTube, and then our era, and now the era after that. So we really, you've had an opportunity to witness all of it. And I just like basketball. You don't want to compare Bob Cousy to, somebody like a Michael Jordan. It's just not fair. It's a whole different sport, different rules. But at the same time, I think that Bob Cousy was there, and because of him, we have a Michael Jordan. Dr. J, we have a Michael Jordan. So, and back to one more thing you said, everybody knew what Michael Jordan was going to do, but nobody could stop it. When Keith reached his peak, Dan, they knew what Keith was going to do. It's just very few people, and you were one of the few that were able to beat Keith during that time. But I will say this last thing. The year before Keith was rated number 1, that's the big mystery year, because it was alphabetical.
And alphabetical. I was number 1. Yes. and Keith was number 10.
Number 10. And in between, but Dan, Keith opened this segment saying that you and I are historians. Well, I look back at those championships, and I will tell you, there are 4 fighters in an alphabetical thing that I never saw fight. I never saw them in any of the tournaments. I don't know how they got rated, but you and Keith and Bobby Tucker and Ray McCallum and several of these other guys, John Longstreet, y'all were winning stuff. And so that's the mystery year. That's 1977, that alphabetical year. And of course you were at the top, Dan. So
Well,
alphabetical A.
And let me add one thing to this, and that's kudos to Renardo Barden, because in '74 when PKA
Yes.
came out, because I remember I was in San Francisco. I had just fought a rough and tumble match with Flem Evans, who was a top 10 fighter. I thought I beat him. He eked out a win. Doesn't matter that he won, because my confidence was that, okay, I'm ready to enter the top 10. I'm ready to enter the big time. I was a top 20 guy. PKA comes out, the bottom falls out of the point game. And so, we didn't have ratings. I think in 76, 77 was the alphabetical year, and then 78, thanks to Renardo, right, we started getting, in his interest, we started getting back the top 10 ratings, because he saw value in the point fighting. So, it was, and this especially for people that might be listening here, wondering what happened. Yeah, the bottom fell out of the point game. Right. We had to restructure and rebuild. And again, thanks to Renardo with the magazines and so forth, repopularize the point game. And to this day, it still rolls. If Renardo hadn't been there with the point fighting, with the ratings and so forth, who knows how popular it would have been, wouldn't have been. But right, we were the phoenix resurrecting from the ashes, man. Anyway, Keith, you were going to say.
You're right.
I was going to say, we mentioned before the Black Belt magazine you're talking about. And I went back and I pulled that copy out, and you're not going to believe some of the names on there. Not only the top 10, but also honorable mention. I'm just going to mention some of these names.
Yeah.
You're 1, I'm 10. Vitali is with a V. Nobody knew that alphabetically. They just thought I was over 10. But James Cook, Steve Fisher, Ray McCallum, Ernie Radar Smith, Bobby Tucker. Now, guess what? Here are some of the honorable mention names: Mike Warren, Roy Bussey, Mike McNamara, Glenn McMorris, Eddie Newman, Jim Booten. So these are all big names. Yeah. So you could tell there's so many dynamic names there that you could almost sense that this circuit was going to be a dynamic circuit with phenomenal fighters, because on any given Sunday, some of these guys could probably win at any given time. Right. And then the next year, I was fortunate to be number 1 at that time. But I just remembered I was so happy to be in the top 10, and that was the beauty of having the hard copies in the magazine stores, the bookstores. You'd go, and guess what? You have to stream online and be specifically looking for martial arts in order to find martial arts. But then you could be strolling through a bookstore, see a cover, and go, "Oh, what's this?" And it could be Bruce Lee or one of us on the cover, and you pick it up and flip through it, and you might buy it. So the whole world had access to our magazines, and it was just a wonderful time. And I think we were in the most blessed time. And I'll tell you why. We followed the greatest generation of fighters, the ones that you were so fortunate enough to compete against, Dan. So we were fortunate enough to have seen most of them, and I was very fortunate to have trained with a lot of them as well. But then we were in a generation where we had movement, but we also had groin kicks. And as much as a kicker as I am, and I hate groin kicks, it forced us to be all around versatile fighters. We just couldn't pick up a leg, like you said, and bounce around the ring, because we had takedowns, sweeps. You could fight on the ground, and I'm telling you, kicking to the groin. So we had to develop, techniques. We had to think about our techniques. Unless you were a guy named Bobby Tucker or Flash Newman or Ray McCallum, they would just blitz at you. But it forced us to be more of an all-around fighter. And then we were so blessed because we had the magazines and Renardo Barden. We had KI, Official Karate, Black Belt Magazine, Sport Karate. We had so many of these great Inside Kung Fu. They followed the tournament circuit. And again, I can't overemphasize this. They put you guys on the covers. And when we're on the covers, people they could hold those magazines and collect those magazines. Streaming, you can't do that. And you can go to ask anybody in the martial arts now and go, "Who's the top fighter in the country?" And they'll go, "I can't tell you." What do you mean you can't tell me? Look at these great athletes that we have. Friend Dan Anderson. But Dan, you want to say something?
let me go over something I alluded to earlier, and this is and what Keith alluded to earlier was that uh, I had been awarded 10th degree by Mr. Steen a couple of years prior to Mike, Keith, and then Bruce Brucci, who isn't here. And and when I heard about it, it was like one of those. There's no way that I can't be down in Texas for this. No way. But what most people don't know, and I'll go public here, is that I remember we were off in this little cafeteria area, and I walked up to Mike and Keith and Bruce and says, "Guys, come here. Because I want a moment with you. Come here. I don't want anybody near. Come here." And so they came over, and I remember the other day, my preamble. Okay, guys, this is the first and only time I'm ever going to big brother you. I have something to say to you, and do not interrupt me. Don't say a word until I'm done. And then from there, it was my congratulations for different reasons for the elevation to 10th degree. And one of the things that I really go by is like, when you're looking at higher degrees, it's not a technical skill. So what do you give back to the art? And, or what do you give back to your community? And, Bruce and Mike are like pillars of give back to the community. I mean, just, you don't hear Mike speaking about himself. It's Mike at this event or that event, promoting the positivity of that event. I mean, very civic minded. And then what I mentioned to Keith was that I've watched a number of champions come and go, and Keith is one of the very, very few who has achieved 2 points, which is I've seen champions who are very, very well respected, but not very well liked. Or I've seen champions who are liked, but maybe not respected as fighters or people. And Keith nailed both of those. And it was like, so I wanted to let them know where I was coming from. Now, see, I wasn't on the board. I was just there waving, "Hi, how are you guys?" and patting you on the backs and so forth. Hans, I don't know. So I didn't pull him off to the side. I pulled the guys that I knew, and I'd known you guys for tons of years. And I figure, Hans is probably the same, except I just didn't know him. But, for anybody watching this, it was one of those with, like Mike said, he was a white belt when he saw me fight in international tournament as a black belt. So I've got X amount of experience that a lot of people don't have. And you see this person, that person, that person, you see the rise and fall of all these different champions and so forth. And I wanted them to know from my perspective why I thought they were worth it and why they were, and it would be something that I think would be looked at differently than most martial artists. Most martial artists go, "Gosh, Keith, you're a 3-time #1 champion. Mike, you're a champion for da-da-da." And, that is an aspect of the art. That's not the art. That's an aspect. If you see what Mike means to his students, okay, it's not Mike Genova, the tournament fighter from back in the day. That Mike Genova's gone. The current Mike Genova is the guy who inspires his students and works on them and having a better life. Keith, you've come. It's interesting because you were quiet for a while, and now you're back out to full-time promoting of the art. But at the same time, when you left the art, you left at a peak point with those two aspects. Respected, but also liked. And I'm sure that we can name a number of champions who either were respected tournament fighters, but you don't like the guy so much. Or there's a lot of guys that we liked, but they didn't hit that #1 level. So anyway, before Mike, well,
Thank you for that,
minute then, minute
Very
now.
nice.
So
I will always remember you pulling me to the side and Mike and Bruce to the side. And it's one of my special memories of all time to have somebody like you, one of us, but to say those wonderful things. It meant the world to me personally. I'll never forget it. I'll be on my deathbed, and that'll be one of the things I'll remember because that was just so kind and thoughtful for you to take that time out and say those wonderful things. And you were part of our history. You were part of our
Yeah.
era. You and Mike were the two most charismatic fighters that we had on the circuit. You were the most loved guys on there. So I am just so blessed to have competed in the air with both of you guys. Well, listen, here's what I'm going to do. Go ahead.
One last thing before Mike leaves. And this is something that, you and I have talked about in the past, but I don't know who else, aside from Mike and I, who routinely signed any kid's brochure. We could be beginning of a match or whatever. Some kid would come up, I remember, Mike, I can't remember which tournament this was, but I know there was one tournament where it was you and I standing there with a bunch of kids around us. And Mid-Americas, yeah, and we're just passing around brochures, tournament magazines, and so here, Mike, and
Mike, you have any closing comments?
Dan, I remember it like it was yesterday. I had a Dallas hat on, and George Chung liked it, and I gave it to I gave my hat to George Chung, and we were all signing autographs. Well, listen, Keith, thank you for inviting me, Dan. Great seeing you. I'm going to go teach those kids now. And you guys have a great day. I love you both.
Thank you so much for being on the show with us. Thanks, Michael. All right.
All right. See you.